I want to welcome you all. I guess we already have a lot of attendees. Thank you for joining, and I'm going to talk about shifting security from right to left. The first thing is, what does that mean, shifting security from right to left? Well, if you look from a security perspective, then security is most of the time it's on the right part. What we mean by that is, if you see a timeline from left to right, then on the right part you have your CI system, or well, just before you go into production, we have that security team in place that checks your stuff. Most of the time, they are the only security enforcer you have. Well, we think that by moving security to the left, so to the developer's focus, that will be much more nicer. Because actually what we're talking about is the word DevSecOps. And personally, I don't know about you, Tricia, but I hate the word DevSecOps. It sounds like my grandfather that wants to talk with the cool kids. And we had this thing with developer and operations, and that sounded kind of okay with DevOps. And now we have this sec in the middle, which tends like, yes, security is everywhere and we have to do it everywhere. Although I may not like the word DevSecOps because, well, I don't think it's pretty, I do agree with the mindset of it, because we need to be aware of security, I think, from every angle within our development cycle. And thinking about that, let me first introduce myself, because, well, people may not know me. I'm Brian. I'm working as a developer advocate for Snyk, the So Now You Know company. I'm based in Holland. I also work for the Utrecht Jug, that's a little Juke puppet over there, and I'm co-lead for the Secure Developer, which is a community, an online community we run that focuses on secure development from the developer focus. We work together with also all sorts of companies over there. So if you feel like this is something you want to put more attention in, feel free to join over there. But going back to DevSecOps, what are we trying to do with DevSecOps? Well, what is actually the problem about DevSecOps? What is the problem that we want to solve? I think for the people that work in, say, the banking environment or government agencies, they probably know that a decade ago, or even a few years ago, they were deploying maybe twice a year, 3 times a year. And what you see now is that we are speeding up that delivery. Everybody wants to speed up that delivery because we want to be ahead of our competitors. We want to have this new business value. We want to create it in smaller pieces, in smaller iterations. And when it's done, we want to do some sort of continuous integration and continuous delivery. But by that, it means that now, well, you can say that we're only focusing on creating new stuff. And that's good. That's a good thing. I mean, business value is the reason why you survive as a company or why you make money as a company. But the other part is more like, okay, if it's not going wrong, nothing is happening, right? And we do not have that much of a focus on security because we need to speed up these things. So if we have a lack of focus on security during that app life cycle, it might mean that we do look into security, but catch these things way too late or not at all. And that's because we're still living in a sort of siloed security expertise. Our security teams, most of the times, are at the end of the line. The gatekeeper that says, stop, you cannot go to production because, well, you do have a vulnerability. On the other side, they want to do penetration testing. They want to do audits or whatever. And that takes a while. That takes a couple of days, maybe a week, or maybe even more. And I deploy now 2 times a day, for instance, because, well, we do this cool microservice kind of thing and small iterations, and we're going up and down. And by the time they tested my stuff, I'm probably like 10 iterations away from that. But the most important thing is, if we are not doing security or not doing security in a proper way, our customer data could be compromised. And that's something we all do not want to happen. We have this GDPR law now in place here in Europe, but in general, things like PII data just lying around for grabs is not a good thing. So how bad is that situation? Well, We got a couple of attendees on, and this always is the question I ask the people is, have you ever heard of Equifax? And a lot of people have heard of Equifax, well, because of these things in the newspaper or news sites. And if I ask the people, did you know about Equifax like 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago? Most of them didn't. So you could say this is good marketing, but I disagree with that. This might be like one big problem. They do know your name, but what happened with Equifax is that Equifax was using, and I'm using this because as well, it's not the only company that is breached, but this is the one that is breached because they were using a dependency, Apache Struts dependency, that was outdated. And it wasn't just outdated, in this specific version they were using, Apache Struts had a vulnerability. And that vulnerability at a certain time was found, was disclosed, was documented, and there was already a fix for it. But if you do not know that you have it, or you do not scan properly, or you do not get warned by somebody that you're using that one, you might end up having this one in production way too long. At the end, 143 million users accounts or data by 143 people were breached, or people's stuff were on the street. So that means that a lot of people's intimate data or important data that you do not want to get out was out on the streets. And again, is there something like bad marketing? Well, I guess so. But if we point that back to our thing, I mean, most of us probably are developers. And if we look at development and we look at your application, then and we just see your application as this, then we can say the amount of code you produce in that application may probably be this. Because for all the things we do, we only want to focus on the real business logic, the things that do make a difference, and not all the boilerplate stuff like creating CRUD repositories, creating REST repositories, making sure that all the plumbing is done. We heavily depend on frameworks, libraries, and all sorts of third-party library stuff. Most of it is open source, and we blindly use it. And is that good or not? Well, I would say it's not a problem that you use open source. We support open source. I'm a big fan of open source, but we have to be sure that open source is just open source. And there are a couple of maintainers on it, or maybe a lot of maintainers on it. But if something slips in, it might be a problem for a whole lot of people because, well, it's being used quite widely. So just an overview. I have a serverless example over here, and you do not have to look at the code because, well, I won't say it's that pretty, but it's 19 lines of code. It has a few dependencies, well, 2 direct dependencies. And as we know, every dependency of every major dependency have transitive dependencies. So dependencies depend on dependencies and depending on other dependencies. In total, we had 19 dependencies. Well, just take a second in your mind and think how many lines of code we actually put into production by just this small serverless example with these 2 direct dependencies. I hope you made a guess inside of your mind. It's like almost 200,000 lines of code. So you see a lot of the lines of code you put into production are not yours. Second one, 222 lines of code. Pretty neat application because Spring serverless, and it has 5 direct dependencies. These 5 direct dependencies result in 54 dependencies in total. Well, you saw how much lines of code we put in production, and we know that, well, Spring does a lot for you in our Java ecosystem. So how many lines of code do you think these 222 lines of code bring you in, you will bring in production? Almost 500,000. So you see that we depend a lot on other people's stuff and use it. And that is good because we do not want to do that much work on boilerplate. And if it's done already and it's done properly, why not use it, right? On the other hand, this open source usage has exploded the last couple of years. Well, not the last couple of years, I think over the last decade. And if the usage of open source is exploded, then we'll see that if we have one vulnerability in a major package, then we will see that many companies, many programs, many applications are vulnerable, and attackers will get into these vulnerabilities and try them out randomly, because Equifax, for instance, wasn't particularly targeted. Now, Equifax was just, well, bad luck, I would say. People tried out the exploit and found out that with this company, they were having that old struts library, and they could get in. They were in there for months and silently looking into the systems and found out what they're having there over there. So there is a risk on open source. Not that you shouldn't use the open source again, but we should be aware of the fact that because of the wide adoption of it, there are some risks. If we look at, for instance, how many packages there are in the ecosystem and how many the total indexed packages were grow last year, then we see that, well, NPM is the clear winner, and it's easy to pick on JavaScript, but because NPM has a package for everything, no, two package or 3 or 4 packages for everything. But if we look at a line that Maven Central has, because, well, Maven Central is still the largest one that supplies packages for you within our Java ecosystem, and you see that this line is very steep as well. And if we look at how many new vulnerabilities last year or the last couple of years were introduced, we in the Java ecosystem are the clear winner, and that's something we shouldn't be proud of. However, if we look at the dependencies, then you see that more or less, not for us, for the Java ecosystem, but also for NPM, for instance, it's not so much the dependency we actually download, but the dependencies underneath. If you, for instance, use Spring, and Spring makes use of a lot of other dependencies, well, because marshalling, for instance, make sure that there are repositories available that drivers can run. So we depend on a lot of things under the hood that we may not know. And most of these flaws and most of the problems are in the indirect dependencies and not so much in the direct dependencies. And if we ask these maintainers, like, okay, how confident are you in your own security knowledge? Well, only 30% think they have high, their scale of security knowledge is quite high, and 63 thinks it's, well, okay-ish. And how much do we lean on that okay-ish? Do we trust it that blindly again? But if we look at the other way around, we are creating new software as developers, right? And who is responsible for security? Well, at least 89% of the people we interviewed, and this is done with a large survey that ended up in a report called The State of Open Source Security. You can download it from our website. But and in this survey we talked to a lot of open source maintainers and application developers in general. And by that, in that survey, the result was that people think that developers should at least have 81% of the people that were interviewed that say that at least 89 that developers should have a lot of responsibility if it comes to security. And well, you may see that it's more than 100%. That's true because you can have shared responsibility. Most people think that it's developers and operations or developers and the security team. But you see that we have to do something as a developer and not just making new shiny things. So if we ask people how do they find out about any vulnerability, 27% probably won't. Or a lot of people just randomly scan the CVE database. And it's quite frightening. So, say, once a dependency is once a vulnerability is found, disclosed, documented, and it's reported back to the owner, to the people that maintain that package. It's probably been it gets fixed very well, but how many days in general does it take to get such a thing fixed? What do you think? It's in days, and it's about 16 days. So that's not very long. So it means once a vulnerability is there, people are very keen on fixing the things and getting out new packages. But say the other way around, say something is in production and you leave it over there, and it might be not vulnerable at the point you put it into production. How many days does it take for a vulnerability to be disclosed and to be documented in general? And this one is not in days. This one is shockingly in years. It's about 2.5 years in general. So that means if we put in something that is cool now and works now, people will try to dig into it. And after a certain amount of time, they will find vulnerabilities. It's not if a package is vulnerable, it is when a package is vulnerable most of the time. And the same thing helps for things like Docker. We're using Docker nowadays heavily. But if we look at, for instance, the Docker images that you can just download from Docker Hub, then we see that even the images that are from, well, their own suppliers. So the node image, if you just download the real node image from Docker Hub, you get, this scan is done in somewhere in March, you get over 500 vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities can almost all be traced back to the base image. And that's hard, because so node as itself is not vulnerable, but it's based on an image, on, well, a full-blown Debian image that might bring all these vulnerabilities with them. And it had and these are all the, well, these are the 10 most downloaded packages at that time. So what I said, it was March or something. So if we know that most vulnerabilities for Docker are in the open source or are in the operating system layer, and if we ask people, do you scan for it? How do you know about it? Well, a lot of people just do not find out. And I think that's worrying. The same thing is if we put these thing into deployment and we just leave it over there, a lot of people will not ever find out if they have a vulnerability. And again, it doesn't stop at the point you put it in production. But I think that's enough talking. Let's do what I think is the cool stuff and go into do some hacking. And I will show you an application. Let me just start it up. It's not that interesting, the application itself. Let me look at the demo application. Let me restart it just to be sure. Always pray to the demo gods first to make sure that your demos are working. I run everything on my local machine just to make sure that we do not have that much of interference. So I've got a very good application, and it's very nice because, well, you see, I'm a good person in UX, right? I can do Bootstrap, basically. It's a pretty simple app. I have to log in. I can post messages over here. So in this case, I'm registering myself as Brian, and I give myself a password. Cool, and I submit. Okay. So now I'm in the message board, and the administrator already put in a few messages, and so I can say, hello JetBrains, and I can put something in. Is everything okay? Well, this is okay, and this works fine, and this is cool. This application has a little bit of authentication and authorization by using a token. I will show that right away, that in the application, we have a token over here. And this token, well, is basically, it's not a token that lives short, what normally you should do, but for the matter of, for the sake of argument, this token is there to identify yourself. And if, as long as I have this token, I am Brian, and I can post over here. But there's another thing we can do. We can, first of all, we have a awesome about page, which says everything about this application. That is the most amazing about page. And we can, for some reason, we can upload files over here. And what we can do over here, we can upload, not just upload files, we can upload zip files. And it will automatically unzip. That sounds really cool. What we're going to do is I know, don't know why, I know that there is a vulnerability over there. And we're going to create a vulnerable zip file. What I'm going to do is, and we'll show you the code about this zip file. It's in my zip creator. And I hope everybody can see it. I'm going to enlarge it a bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a zip file called JetBrains demo zip. And it contains two things. It contains a text file with the body of this is a good text file. And it contains another file, which is the about page.html. Well, I'm going to create the about page.html. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to do some path traversal over here. Normally, the zip file will be downloaded or will be extracted in a certain file, in the public items file or something like that. And I'm going to backtrack out of this thing, or I'm going to try to do that and override the about page in my system. So what I need to do, I need to have the content of that about page. So let's go to the about page. I'm going to inspect that one, and then we can get source. Well, I don't really care what's happening here. I just copy and paste it. Copy it, and you see I go in for the content and the evil.txt. I'll open evil.txt, and you see a little script over here. Let me just first put the HTML over here and make sure that the script is part of the HTML. And oh, now I have to end it with like this. Cool. And what you see over here is that I just recreated the same HTML page, and just to show you that it's different, I will put a dot behind this, so that if we override it, then you can see that it happens. And I insert some malicious JavaScript over here. With the JavaScript, I will grab the cookie, and I will look what cookie you have, and I send that cookie to another URL. And what this another URL does, I will show you right now. If I have a thing like over here, and I give it the value hi Trisha, then it gives me the hi Trisha back. But if I look into this little application I have, this is my help browser, and then you see it's items. Then you see that this hi Trisha is saved over here. So if I can save any text over here that I just give to the parameter of this URL, that is cool just to save some things. But what I'm trying to do here in this thing is getting your cookie and try to store that cookie with that service. So just redirect it to another URL so I can just steal your token. Well, having said that, I want to do this. Let me just create this zip file. And by doing so, you will see over here that I just created this zip file. Cool. Let's go back into the application. I will go into, I'm still Brian, and I'm uploading this file. It doesn't matter who uploads it because we're going to overwrite stuff. So I'm going to upload this JetBrains demo we just created. Oh, let me just show you that it's really a zip file. If I go into the terminal over here, and I see that my JetBrains demo zip is over here. And if we look at the zip info of this zip file, then you see that it contains a good.txt and a weird HTML file with some ... in it. So going to my browser, I will pick up this zip, open it, and I submit it. And what we see over here is that we have no errors, and we see that the good.txt that I also put in was unpacked and displayed over here. And this displays the target directory where the thing's supposed to be going. So that might mean that the other part of the zip file, the ... part, the about HTML, is also unpacked and does some maybe does some path traversal, and maybe means that the about page now contains that dot. It also means that my cookie was read from my browser and was sent to my other servers over here. So if I just rerun that items, then you see that I now have a token. You see this token over here? This is the one I can now use. So let me put that on my clipboard. Let me open a new browser and go to the local host. Let me simply, just to make sure that it works, let me log in, and now I am user foo. Hi, you see? But by going to my application cookies, deleting this, inserting this one I just stole. Cool. Let me try again. Now certainly I'm Brian. That means that from this other browser, I stole your token and I can now take over your session. Of course, this website is not really secure. The token is not a long-lived token, and etc., etc. But you see how easy it is if a zip file is not properly constructed. And on the other side, it's not properly unzipped. So you see that I just stole your thing, and I can do much more. And if I go to the other web page, so the normal ones over here, and I go to messages, you see that I didn't type this, but the other person that stole my token did. Well, that's about the hacking part, but now we're going to look into the problem part. So going into your IDE in this case, well, I'm first going to show you where the problem is. And we can do this in a certain amount of ways, because for the unzipping part, I'm using a library. If I'm going to my Maven POM, you will see I will use this ZT-zip library. But, well, I just got this from the internet, from Maven Central, whenever ago, and I just put it in and it works. So how can we find out that something is vulnerable? Because as a developer, I want to know if I'm vulnerable and what is vulnerable, and if I can solve it. Because if I can solve it on my local machine, then it will be so much more great than at the end of the line, because then I maybe have to do some rework, maybe things cannot be used, so you look for another package. And if I can look it up now and see if a package is already vulnerable or not, then it might save me a lot of time. So we can do that in a few ways. I've installed the Snyk tooling on this machine, and I installed the Snyk CLI, and we can use it from our terminal. And well, although you can use your terminal, the one over here, you can also use your terminal over here. So here I'm already in the correct path, and I'm simply calling Snyk test. It is as easy as that. And what you see is that from this point, it will analyze your Maven dependency tree. It will create a tree for you, and it sends the tree over to the Snyk Online system. And what the Snyk Online system does, it simply looks at your dependency tree and see which dependency you use and which transit dependencies they have, and if there are vulnerabilities in there. So I now see over here that I have this ZT-zip file, and it has a problem. Well, let me see what the problem is. By going to the website, you will get information about a certain exploit, and you'll see what the problem is, and you'll see which versions are vulnerable and which not. And you'll see on the website that it's something with 113, that might be okay. So it gives you information how important this is or not. This one is just a medium severity. Going back to my my terminal over here, it also gives me a remediation advice, and it says that by not using 12 but using 1.13, it will solve the problem. But this is from your terminal, and it can be nice, and it has some other things. In this case, the CLI also scans for licensing problems. But what we also have is we created something for the actual vulnerabilities, not for the licensing problem, but for the vulnerabilities. We created a plugin for IntelliJ, and that plugin works with Maven. So for the questions, does it also work with Gradle? Not yet. We're working on that one. That is on our backlog. But just to show you how easy it is if you're using Maven, and we see that still from the JVM report last year, we see that Maven is still the greatest one, or the biggest, the largest used package managing or dependency management system. If I open my Maven thing over here and I open the Snyk plugin over here, then I can, and I just, well, let me be sure that it works over here. And you see that we have two real vulnerabilities, and that's a vulnerability of my H2 database, which I use just for demoing purposes, and it's that zero turnaround problem. Well, both of these problems are top-level dependencies, and so this is quite easy. But say, for instance, I would be using a 2.0. This won't work because I have not. Yes, okay. So now you see that I'm using an older Spring version, and you see that we have much more problems. For instance, over here, it's something with the fast XML Jackson thingy. And by opening it, you will see where the actual problem is. It's not in the Spring Boot starter data res, but the Spring Boot starter JSON. And by updating it to another version, it will help you out. And that version that we just showed you over here doesn't have that vulnerability anymore. But let me go back, and you can go up and down with that, and you see that we have that for many other things. Right? So, oh, that's cache. I'm going to go back to my original one, not 5 release, update it over here. And you see that I only have 2 vulnerabilities left. By clicking on it, I will go directly into my POM file to the right declaration. And I see over here it's 1.12. And by doing the 1.13, and again, yes, you can also, I could also do the auto imports, but I choose not to, because normally I work with larger Maven POM files and it can take a while. And then now I see I fixed this vulnerability by simply putting in another number. And I only have this H2 left over here. So I'm going to restart this demo. So by killing this one and running my application once again, the application is up. Once again, creating the zip file because, well, I automatically clean it up because I do not want to end up with that much fuzz if I want to redo the demo. But by running this zip creator again, and we again have that JetBrains demo zip, which, just to prove that it's real, it has that about page. So I'm going to do the same thing again. So going back here, going to do the 8080 part. Well, have to log in or register myself. Register again as Brian because, well, I'm using an H2 database, so everything is gone. No, I do not want to save it. And I can do messages again. Perfect. That works. I'm going to upload that file again. The same vulnerable file, I open it and I submit. And now I see I have a white label error page. And if you see in the bottom line, you see that the file //target is trying to leave the target output directory of the public upload. And we're ignoring this file. So, okay, that means that if I'm going back to my home page, going back to the files, the good.txt is there, but the about page is without the dot. And to inspect the HTML, we will see it does not contain that malicious JavaScript on the bottom. So what we see over here is that by just using another package and making sure that I can do that from my local machine, I can save my team and the rest of the world maybe from a lot of harm. And that's what we mean by shifting security left, is that we want to be able to do this from the perspective of a developer. So you want to provide you with tools to help you out, not just to point out that something is vulnerable or not, but also how to fix it or how to make it less vulnerable. And then it's up to you how to do that. If it's a vulnerability that is not that major or it's not applicable to you, then you can choose to ignore it. But if it is if it's a vulnerability that you might think that, okay, this can be awful, then you can fix it, well, in a blink of an eye. And if I can do it now and now push it to my master repo, instead of pushing a vulnerable library at this point and not and only catching it at the end, we save ourselves a lot of times, because it doesn't have to go that whole cycle from up and down from the CI, and I don't have to wait on my CI system to point out that we have a problem, and I can do that before something happens. So actually what we want to do over here is we want to solve problems, right? So if we look at a solution for this, we think that it's about three things: team culture, process, and tooling. And these things are equally important, because the tooling can be great, but if it doesn't fit your team culture or your process, it will be doomed. So if we look at, that is weird. If we look at team culture, we have to look at the point, what do people care about? Well, developers, we care about creating new stuff, putting this new stuff as fast as possible into our products, and move on to the next cool thing we want to create, right? So we want to create things and we want to make it work. We want to build things. That's what we, and I consider myself still a developer, although I'm a developer advocate, we want to make things. The security team, most of the time, doesn't care about if it works or not, because if it doesn't work, it will not go to production. They do not have to care about security issues. So they have I have another point of view on it. The only thing they think about, the only thing they care about is not being vulnerable, not being hacked, not being exploited, and that the data of the customers is safe. Operations people, they think about maintainability. How can we easily maintain this system? Can I just push a button and reset the service? Can I just redeploy the stuff so it will be maybe even self-healing or something like that? And if a developer cannot make it work, well, it doesn't go into production, and the operations team doesn't have to maintain it. They do not care about if it's secure or not. Their job is to maintain stuff. And management, well, I could make it that easy. Management cares about money, but they care about profitability, making it profitable, and making sure that you, as a company, are still in the lead if you compare that to your competitors. So if we can align this, and if we can see that the security is part of everybody's job, and take it back to ourselves at first, because, well, we cannot change other people, but we can change ourselves. If we can take that up to developers, then we still have to put it into our process, right? So process is a bit of a hustle, because nobody wants to change in general. Some people might want to change, but not really. if I create a super new cool process around things, people are not used to that. People will make mistakes in the process, or people just don't care. And if we can use your current process, which works and the people are familiar with, and just make the new practices work in that process that's already working for you, then you might have a chance. If we want to create more process, we will end up doing this for 2 weeks and then back to normal, right? So then the tooling. The tooling should support your process. So you have to pick tooling that is there and works for you. Well, that's why I showed you that you can do this from your local machine. So you're not only waiting for at the end, but you can now do this while you are developing inside your IDE. Or if you're more of a terminal person like me, you can use it from the terminal. If you use the rest of our Snyk stack, you can connect your repository to our scanning capabilities as well. So every time a new pull request come in, we can scan it for you every time, and we can scan it on a daily basis for you, because, well, vulnerabilities takes time to be found. And the fun part is that you can do that integrated into your CI system still, because, well, that is still needed, the gatekeeper, but not just as the only part. And then you're not done, because once it is in production, we still need to scan. And we can do that either from our local system or from our CI system. But if I just do over here from the terminal, instead of Snyk test, what I already did, and I do Snyk monitor, what you see is that it will create a dependency tree again from the local system, and it posts that snapshot to the website. And by going to this URL, you will see that I have a few problems with licensing, and I have that thing with the H2 database. And now you can scan it on a daily basis. So when you go to production, take that snapshot, put it up in the air. We only take a look at your dependency tree, not your code, because, well, as I say, we do not care about your code, or we cannot say anything about your code without any context. But we can scan your dependencies, that you know that the things you trust on or you use, even if they are in production, you can be alerted and not actively looking for new vulnerabilities, but let our system or any system alert you. So at the end, what we are trying to say is shift security left. Make sure that you start on the left side, you start on your local machine. Do it in all the other passes within your development cycle, in your master branch, or scan your Git repository, scan your new pull request, scan while doing it on your CI inside of your CI build, and also scan while you're in production. But you have to start at the far left, and that's most of the time it's us at the local machines at your IDE, and that's why we created the plugins. And that's why we will maintain the plugins, that we will expand the plugins with new capabilities, for instance, for Gradle in a later stage. And for now, if you, for instance, want to use Gradle instead of Maven, you can do that by using the CLI, so the terminal, the command line tool that supports Gradle. Only the plugin not yet, but you see how nice it is if we can do this from our system and just by a single click go to the vulnerable application or the vulnerable part and fix it. I'm ending here. Well, you see my email and my Twitter handle if you have questions afterwards. On the right side of your screen, you will see a very 1980 QR code. No, I'm kidding about that. With a link below that, and that link is about the new JVM survey we just put out. And I want to ask everybody who working on Java or any JVM language to fill in that survey, to give not only us, but we will publish it we will publish the results anyway, to give us a better view on how the whole JVM ecosystem and landscape works. We work together with the major conferences within the Java world, so as Devox and DevNexus and JFocus and all these guys helping us out as well. And the more info we have, the more we can help developers out, because that's basically what we're trying to do. And yeah, that's the end of the stuff I prepared for this webinar. So are there any questions, Tricia?
That was great, thank you. I found it kind of scary how easy it is to sometimes to hack into other people's sessions and manipulate things. We did have a few questions. You mostly answered them during the session. So we had a question about what does it work for Gradle, which you said that the Gradle stuff is a work in progress. This is for the plugin, right?
Yeah, the Gradle is the Gradle part is work in progress for the plugin. It does. We have the scanning capabilities already in our system, in our online system, and in the CLI. So if you just do Snyk test in your from out your terminal or from out your terminal within IntelliJ, you already get results on Gradle. So, right, so it works, but it doesn't work yet in the plugin, and we're working on
in the plugin for the IDE. I've been asked about if there's a timeline for that, but I know that asking for estimates is always a tricky thing.
Yeah, I will not give estimates on that because I'm not the only one working on that, and we support a lot of ecosystems. We try to make it as soon as possible, but in the meantime, we're also doing plugins for other things, for other IDEs, for other CI systems. I'm sorry, but we also first we did the implementation of the plugin for TeamCity to make sure that we work with one of the greatest CI systems. And well, this one was the first actually. So this one was first, and after that the rest came. And yes, we're working on that. I'm not giving you can give you any timeline on that, but it's very high on our backlog. That's the only thing I can say.
Yeah, fair enough. And if the support is already there in the CLI, it's not like it can't be done for Gradle. It's just it can't be done through the IDE plugin specifically. You mentioned exactly. The TeamCity plugin there, so I think that's an interesting part too. I mean, having it in the IDE is really useful for developers, but having it as part of your continuous integration pipeline is also sort of probably even more important, because you want to be able to catch it at a more centralized place than necessarily just relying on each individual developer, right?
I think you have to do both. So yeah. If you do it on your developer machines, you will not get new problems in, but you still have to do it inside of your continuous integration pipeline, because well, you do not want to go to productions, and by the time it leaves your machine until you are in your until you're building it and deploying it, that can take a few. Well, it maybe takes weeks, because well, I didn't check into the master branch, but did it on a separate branch because I'm developing something, and at that point it was still good. I posted, and then we have that problem. So you have to do it. I think you have to do it in all levels during all points within your development cycle. So it's not just one or the other. I think. But that's, of course, I'm working for a security company, so it's preaching for your own choir. I think you have to do it in every step.
Yeah, I think it's the same as any standards. If you want to be safe with it, if you want to be quick with it, have it at the developer level. If you want to be secure that it's being applied before it goes into production, like you say, you need it at all points in the process. Yeah. Another question was, do we need to install the CLI to use the plugin?
No. You do not need to. If you can install the CLI, but you do not have to install the CLI to use the plugin. What you have to do to use the plugin is to download it from the marketplace, and you do have to connect it to a Snyk account. And the Snyk account is free. I'm not sure if you have to create a Snyk account first, or you can create a Snyk account on demand, because well, I have this thing on the plugin on for ages, and well, why should I uninstall it? So I didn't try that. I'm not sure yet. But you have to connect your Snyk account to the plugin, and it will be a one-time job to do so, and it's free. are there any questions about that kind of thing? If you can use it for free, so I can make that a little bridge.
Well, there's a kind of related question which was, does it work with the community version of IntelliJ IDEA as well as the ultimate version? And I found from the documentation it works with both community and ultimate. So
true.
Yeah, so you can use it with free IDE and free Snyk account.
Yes, and if you do open source, the free Snyk account has a few limitations, because from the free Snyk account you can only do, I think it was 200 tests a month. But if you don't do that like 200 times consecutively, you can run with it. If you do this for if you do open source development, so you're maintaining open source packages, then we give you unlimited tests. And you can do that from the free community version of IntelliJ or the paid version. It doesn't matter. It works on both. Okay.
Another question. Since we need a Snyk account, how much of the local code is uploaded to the Snyk server?
Zero.
Just the dependencies?
Yeah, we will create a dependency tree in a certain format, and so basically the package name and a version number, and at that point we can just how do you say that, cross compare it to our proprietary vulnerability database. That is basically what we do, and then we can find out if it's the top level or the transitive dependency that causes the problem, what the severity is, and what maybe the solution is, if there is a solution, because for some packages there's not yet a solution. And well, so no, we do not keep your code.
Okay, the response to that on the questions was, that's awesome. Okay, I actually just wanted to reiterate something else you said about the JVM survey there. I will be adding a link to the JVM survey that you're running from Snyk in Annotated Monthly this week, because like you were saying, I think it's really interesting to gather feedback from a bunch of developers from different business domains, different countries, different backgrounds about what's happening in the JVM world, so that, you know, we can kind of, everyone who builds products or open source software or whatever can see what real developers are actually doing in the real world, and tailor our products accordingly, really. So I highly recommend that people go in and fill in that survey, because it's really interesting for anyone who has a Java or JVM related product.
I think so, yeah.
There doesn't look like there's any more questions at the moment. We're coming up to the top of the hour anyway, so I think at this point it'll be quite good to wrap up. Have you got any more closing comments, or are we good to wrap up?
No, I don't have any closing comments. If you come up with questions, feel free to ping me on Twitter or send me an email, and I will be glad to answer them, or redirect you to the people that can actually answer certain insights. So no, I would just want to thank everybody for jumping in and listening.
Great, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on and giving this talk. I must admit, I'm one of those developers who's a bit lazy around security, and anything which kind of can make my life easier in the IDE and point to problems before they become real problems is a lifesaver for someone like me. So this was super useful. As I mentioned before, we will be putting the recording on the IntelliJ IDEA blog at some point in the next few days, and you can always see recordings of previous webinars, of screencasts, etc. on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Brian, for coming in and presenting. You're getting a lot of great feedback on the questions panel, saying it was a great talk. Thank you.